The Camp Farthest Out doesn't pretend to take the place of a theological seminary. The seminary will give you have a whole year by which you can study the Bible, and 3 years to take thorough courses in it, which is very valuable. It'll give you the whole background of church history, and it'll teach you how to give sermons and how to perform or conduct the services for funerals and baptisms and weddings, and how to raise money for the church funds and so on. All those things, but it's the one thing it omits, according to every professor that I've talked with on theological seminaries. I'm not criticizing them. I'm merely telling the facts as they stated. The one thing they do not teach is prayer. And many of them say that our boys leave the seminary knowing less about prayer than when they came. And they're so worn out the last year of studying for examinations and writing theses and carrying a charge, a regular full-time church service, supporting their wife probably and their children and everything else, that when they they graduate, they're exhausted physically and spiritually. And I've always felt that if every graduate of a seminary should come to a Camp Farthest Out and spend 1 week even to get that one little, get the push back on the peak, to get the fuzz back on the peak, to get the life, the sap of prayer injected into them, then they would be completely prepared. Therefore, I feel the Camp Farthest Out it makes a wonderful supplement, and I'm planning to make a started campaign for raising $50,000 to have scholarships for any divinity student in all America when he graduates, or even starting his senior year, to come to the Camp Farthest Out. I think that would do more to just feel spiritual power into the churches, those young men going out then to their churches, where that spirit would help to lift put the power of prayer back into our churches as never before. Well, we started the Camp Farthest Out in Glendora, California. And after 2 years, they said this school, it was a girls' school we were using, is too small for us. Let us go to Whittier College next year. We went to Whittier College, and after 2 years, they said, this place is too small. Let us go to Pomona College. After 2 years at Pomona College, they said, this place is too small. Let us go to Redlands University, and there we'll meet 300 people every year. This year, they said we had an unusually small camp. They apologized because they only had 250. The same way at Ohio. We started out at Bethesda with just 108. This year there are 540, and we didn't have room. I wish we'd had a chapel like this. We just had to put up a sign to the people of Ohio and the city and the neighboring cities. We just can't have anyone else come. This is closed, a closed camp. So they may have to look for a larger camp. Maybe they have to go to Ohio State University or to Harvard University or some immense place. Well, that's exactly the way this School of the Prophets came. One day, a young man came to Elisha, who was, by the way, was the founder of it, and said, this place is too small for us. Let us all go down to the Jordan, and we'll all cut down a tree, and we'll build a bigger Camp Farthest Out. Now, Elisha was very much like the founder of this modern Camp Farthest Out. He was a little overweight. He loved malted milk. He was a little bit lazy. He believed in redemptive loafing. He never did anything that he'd find anybody else could do as well or better. I can prove that. Elijah was a muscular, bony, motive type, and he did everything himself. He dug trenches, you know, filled them with water, and then let the Lord send down the fire, and it even burned the water up. And when a boy got sick, he picked him up and carried him up into the prophet's chamber himself. But Elisha, he was out under a fig tree reading the Reader's Digest, and the boy was taken sick, and the mother picked the boy up. She said, I know that Elisha won't do it, and he's too lazy, so she picked him, carried him up to the prophet's chamber, and she sent a servant out to bring Elisha in, and she knew exactly what he'd do. He'd say, here's my staff. You can just take it, and I'll pray for you, and I want to finish this interesting article by William Hardin in the Reader's Digest. And sure enough, back came the servant with the staff. You can just see her taking off her apron and wiping the flour off her hands, and she went right out there and took him by the ear and said, you've got to come in here. And he had to come in. But Naaman came down to see him, as famous as General Eisenhower in his day, with a whole battalion of folks and the brass band and everything. And they came to the cabin where he lived, and he was sitting in there by the window reading the last chapter in the last article in the Reader's Digest, and he said, you just tell General Naaman to go and jump in the lake. Well, General Naaman felt that as an insult. He said, at least he might have come out and bowed to me. And aren't there better rivers than that, just as good rivers than that? I'm poking a little fun at Elisha, because sometimes things can happen by being lazy at the right time, and I'm one of those that discovered that. And the result is, I find I'm able to do 3 men's work by letting the Lord do it all, and letting other folks do everything that I can better than I. Stanley Jones is more like Elijah. He's the major prophet. I'm just tag along and learn some things, you see. We go to an ashram, and he gives most of the talks. He gives at least 2 of the talks, the main ones. And you come to a Camp Farthest Out, and you'll find the best talks are given by other people, and I just fill in, and so on. Now, in other words, I want you to look at the thing I'm trying to tell you is that I'm trying to tell you that I'm lazy. I'm not telling you that I'm a second Elisha. I'm just imitate the 2 or 3 qualities in Elisha that you might not admire. One of them is laziness. Well, at any rate, there's that kindred spirit between these 2 camps. And now I'm going to tell you the secret of Elisha's prayer power. There are more miracles recorded by Elisha than by anyone else, although he was not one of the greater prophets. I've written 20 books on prayer, and I'm not as great as Elisha. Why didn't he at least write 1 book? Why wasn't he kind enough and thoughtful enough for us folks down here? He's too busy, I suppose. Maybe they didn't have typewriters in those days. Or at any rate, he didn't even write 1 book. St. Paul did write a book on prayer, a little booklet called the Letter to the Ephesians. You read that carefully, and you'll find his secret. They have discovered many lost languages by finding the hieroglyphics and then discovering the code. During the First World War, many phonograph records were being smuggled into Germany through Spain. They were intercepted, many of them were, and they were examined, and they were just simple, innocent records of classical music. So why waste time trying to pick up those records? Let them go through. But one day in the War Office in Paris, a chief of detectives had fallen half asleep, and he forgot to wind the phonograph, and all of a sudden he woke to hear it running down, and he could hear a little click, 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 and by running it very slowly, they discovered there was a kind of a signal, a Morse code in there. When they deciphered the code, they found that Germany was receiving all information about all the movements of the Allied soldiers and armies and navies. I made this discovery. You pick the Bible up and you get quiet before it. Slow down long enough, and you're going to find a marvelous secret code. You'll find the whole secret, marvelous secret method of prayer of Elisha is concealed in a secret code in the 6th chapter of the 2nd book of Kings. You'll find it all in the first 7 verses. And the sons of the prophets said unto Elisha, Behold now, the place where we dwell with thee is too strait for us. This is too small for us. Let us go, we pray thee, unto Jordan, and take thence every man a beam, and let us make us a place there where we may dwell. And he answered, Go ye. And one said, Be content, I pray thee, and go with thy servants. And Elisha answered, much to their surprise, much to my surprise, and much to Elisha's surprise, I will go. Instead of sitting there on the bench and reading the Reader's Digest, he got up and he went with them. So he went with them, and when they came to the Jordan, they cut down wood. But as one was felling a beam, the axe head fell into the water, and he cried and said, Alas, master, for it was borrowed. And the man of God said, Where fell it? And he showed him the place, and he cut down a stick and cast it in thither, and the iron did swim. Therefore said he, Take it up to thee, and he put out his hand and took it. And in his last three verses, 5, 6, and 7, you'll find the whole art of prayer as practiced by Elisha. Now let us interpret it. First of all, the young man said, Alas, it was borrowed, the axe head. Now, the trouble with too much of our religion is we give too much attention to shaping the axe handle. A young minister said, I have, when I was in the Philippines, when I was down in the Philippines, we were received by the leading bishop of all the Philippines. He was the presiding bishop of all the bishops. He's been a student under me at McAllister College. He was the greatest orator of Minnesota. And now he's the outstanding orator of the Philippines, a man that someday may be president of the Philippines. And he opens the doors where we can always have Camps Farthest Out, and he arranged for two of them. The Philippines just opened before us because the Lord has sent him to McAllister. But I'm going to tell you the one limitation he had. A wonderful orator. All the handle is perfect. Folks, he didn't have this thing we're giving at the Camps Farthest Out. Folks said the most wonderful thing here is that you came down here, that this bishop would catch this. If he catches this, he'll spread it all over the Philippines. But if you lose, he didn't have to borrow anything from God. He could make the oration. If the boys like my son-in-law that stuttered so that he just couldn't be heard. And when they began to ask, he said it to the Clear Horizons, and when I would leave on these journeys, my Bible class would beg him to come, and he refused to go because he just never could make a speech. Then he said one day they played a dirty trick on me. They prayed, and after they prayed, of course, I had to go. But he went, and he just threw himself on the Holy Spirit, and he didn't stutter as much as I do. And now he's in demand in camps all over the country, but where's his power? From any polished oratory, the handle, he never spent any time on the handle. The only thing he has is the axe head, and it had to come, and not until not until that sharp cutting point of prayer and power gets into our churches are we going to get there. Wonderful buildings. I've gone into marvelous structures and heard a fine speech on prayer. That's why I say we should make an effort to get the ministers into this. When we get them, what will we do? There's Peter Marshall. I was held Camps Farthest Out in his church, but he didn't have this. He was such a wonderful orator, he didn't need to lean on the Lord. One day he said, I wish you'd go up to my house. I'll pay for the taxi if you'll just go up there to see my wife. She's been flat on her back for 2 years with TB, and she reads all your books. Well, was she glad to see me? And you know what is the center of our prayer? Don't pray for my healing. It's coming. Your books have been doing that. Pray for Peter Marshall to catch this. And when he caught it, he became chaplain of the Senate. A book's been written about him. There's going to be a movie put on about him. And he's just, as she said, the Lord took him into heaven, and he's doing far more from opening the gates to the skies of heaven than he could have done down here. He got that sharp hit. He had the axe handle, and that's why we are the world's in the mess that is. If every Christian Don't think I'm centering on the ministers. It's we Christians, we laymen that are the one reason that ministers don't get this. They say, if I go to a camp and get this, I come home and they'll say I'm a crackpot, because the rest of most of my church members, or half of them, will go to cocktail parties, and they come to the church every Sunday morning as they would come to a middle-class Rotary Club, and that's what they want. They want to sit down comfortably for 1 hour every morning, and if I get up and try to stir them, then what'll happen? I'll lose my job. What we need to do, if all the Christians of America got the axe hit, we could just sweep all the evils out just like that. Liquor, 65 million, over two-thirds of the population of America drink, and half of the members of most of our Eastern churches drink and smoke, and all that sort of thing. The point I'm getting at is this: we don't want to do like the headhunters doing in over there in Formosa. They couldn't get into polite society until they'd brought a head. Now, a student of mine that caught this powerfully when she was in college, she's gone up among those headhunters, and they have built 160 churches of their own hands without any help from American money, and no one is permitted to join a church over there till he brings a soul. Instead of a head, they got to save a soul. Nobody drinks or smokes. They have to cut it out if they belong to that church, and they all of them try to learn how to pray. In other words, there is a marvelous when you find that we get the Christians of the world awakened to the axe hit. Well, if Mary Light or I have any power, don't need to praise us. If he does, it will just flow off like the water off a duck's back. If there's any power that we have, it's all borrowed. It's all borrowed. And if we should lose that, we would not be worthwhile to even be here. You don't want to hear at the Camps Farthest Out someone make beautiful gestures, have wonderful voices, and have wonderful oratory. You come here for manna. And manna is illustrated there by the thing that is borrowed, something from above. Now let's go into the secret laws of prayer as revealed here by in this sixth book of sixth chapter of Kings. Where did you lose it? Said Elisha. Now that's the first question. That's the question that the psychiatrist asked. Where did this thing begin? Where did this thing begin? And even Jesus, who's the first psychiatrist, and spiritual psychiatrist, he said to the man who had a son, an epileptic son, when did this first begin? A woman in Dayton, Ohio, told my daughter, Helen May, whose husband, Dermot Olson, wrote the first steps in prayer. She said, I have a daughter, a married daughter down in Greenville, South Carolina, who hasn't been able to hold any food for 4 years. In the last 4 years, she's only held 4 meals. The way she keeps alive is by eating 10 meals a day. She can hold it for just about 3 minutes before she loses it. And as she's fading away, she's just skin and bones. The doctors have examined her. There's nothing the matter with her. They can't find her anything wrong mentally or physically. If I paid her away from South Carolina to St. Paul, would you write your father if he'd be willing to pray for her? Well, I don't want folks to make the long, expensive journeys like that, because I never have healed anyone. God does the healing. It's all borrowed. And it won't work unless they also come with faith, and I'm not going to ask them to gamble on that. But I wrote I'm going to be down in Atlanta, Georgia, next month, speaking in the Methodist Church, and if she wanted for a husband to drive her over there, we might have a prayer there. So after I finished my address, a young couple sitting on the front seat, and I recognized them. She was beautiful, but just a skeleton almost. He was wonderfully well-nourished. He hardly needed 10 meals a day. And I asked her, when did this begin? When did this begin? Well, she told me some little clashes here and there. We threw them out one by one, but something deeper than that. She said, When I married, I was afraid that if I got too fat, my husband would stop loving me. I said, well, now your subconscious heard you say that. The subconscious has more influence in our lives than we dream, and it is more consistent and more serious and more, well, it takes things more on faith than we do. We'll call it our little junior. Now, little junior heard you say that, and little junior said, all right, I'll see that she doesn't get too fat. I'll see that she doesn't get any fat. And that little junior was doing such a fine job that she was just fading away. I said, are you afraid that your husband would stop loving you now if she got too fat? I should say not. He stuck to me through thick and thin, especially thin. And I said, now, little junior, you heard her say that. She wants to get some fat. I want to compliment you, little junior, on being so faithful that you have did such a fine job to keep her from getting fat. Now I want you to be just as faithful and see that she gets some fat. And that's the command. You know, Jesus talked into the subconscious, and when a demon got control, he'd just say, you demons leave, and they'd leave. And then they'd command, if I can get hold of the subconscious of a person, so they'll believe a thing clear through. If you've read my books and know what I mean by the hinds feet, to bring the subconscious to track exactly in the same consistency with the conscious mind, when you can say, praise the Lord, all my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name, all that is within me, not only just out of it, the whole being. The man thinketh in his heart, in his subconscious, so is he. And so I said, little junior, you see that she gets some fat. And then I said, I wish you two would come to the hotel where I'm staying tomorrow morning and eat a great big breakfast. She did. And she gained 35 pounds. That brought her up to just about the shape of Venus de Milo. Edith, you stand up just for 1 minute. See, now she isn't too fat. Now sit down. People are afraid ladies are afraid to have me pray for them if they think they're going to gain 35 pounds. But maybe we could ask the Lord and little junior to reduce some, too. I've never tried that. Well, now, what happened? I went to Greenville about a year later to speak, and I went to the Methodist Church, and it was packed, 1,200 people, and they had to turn away 100, which caused a sensation. I said to the minister, did it turn out like this? Oh, no, he said, but for a solid year, people have been meeting Helen Carnes on the street, and they say, what happened to you? And she'd say, you come to the Methodist Church on February 14th, and you'll see what happened to me. And they all came to see this marvelous miracle worker, and I'm no miracle worker. All I did was to do exactly what Elisha told you can do. Ask, where did you lose it? Then ask the Lord to take hold of it right there and begin to start the cure. We used that at this Camps Farthest Out. But there's now the next law that he used was this. He took a stick that he could take hold of, and he could toss it out exactly where it was lost. And the axe head came swimming up. By the way, if anyone has come expecting to hear at church, the college meeting, it's postponed and till next week. And I'm telling them, the folks of the Camp Farthest Out, the first Camp Farthest Out, which was held 2,000 years before Jesus, the leader of it was Elisha. And they wanted. Now, the purpose of a camp, if you use your intellect, you go far out. The savages didn't use their intellect, and they didn't build electric lights and things like that. You use your intellect, you go far out. When you get up in the psychic realm and the subconscious, you go farther out. But when you get up into the spiritual and the superconscious, you go the farthest out. We don't want to stop down here with mental telepathy and hypnotism and all those things that some people get tangled up in. We cast all those things aside, just as you would not depend upon merely the physical. But we want to go clear through and have our prayers go to heaven and not matter merely of a concentration and the meditation alone. Well, now he said, where did you lose it? They said, all right. So he picked up a stick that filled his hand. He didn't pick up a giant sequoia tree that he couldn't lift, and he didn't pick up a straw that would blow away. He picked up something that he could grasp, and he tossed it out where the axe head had been lost, and it came swimming up. Now, in some schools, they say that is just a superstition. We can laugh that away. But, ladies and gentlemen, I got into a building that was 20 times as long as this building, made of iron and steel, and it floated. It much far heavier than that axe head, and it floated and carried me across to Europe. This last year, we got on a building as big as this, made of iron and steel. It is bigger than this, and it carried us through the air, and we were taken clear around the world on heavy weights, heavy pieces of steel, like the magic carpet. Why, the magic carpet just vanished away into insignificance before this heavy thing weighing 2,000 tons. We weigh, on this great flying instrument weighing 2,000 tons, came down and lit on the ground as lightly as a feather. Magic, sure. They went far out intellectually, but we've got to go farthest out to fly around the world in prayer and save the world. Well, what does this symbolize? Take hold of something that you can grasp mentally, that you can believe thoroughly, and then toss it over there and apply it spiritually at the same faith in the spiritual field that you have in this other field. And what can you do? Why, you can work miracles. Supposing I were offered $100 and all my expenses to Washington, if I go up on the Washington Monument and take a parachute, which they had trained me in using, and would promise they would train me, and pull a certain string after I leaped out, and then just go floating down beautifully and all that. And if that was put in the Washington Post that evening, announced that that evening I was going to speak, I expect I would have 10,000 people. Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? Well, now that's a little bit like the temptation of Jesus of jumping down from the mountain. But supposing I would, they'd say, now, will you do that? I'd say, no. Well, we'll give you $1,000. No. Give you $10,000. No. Why? They said, don't you believe it'll open? Yes, I believe it will open, but I don't know it will open. When I know it with every fiber of my being, I might do it. There's a young friend of mine who was in the parachutist division in the Army. He loved leaping from planes. Nothing better, the greater sport in the world than to jump out and pull that string and go down. Why, if he just paid his expenses to Washington, he'd do it for the joy of it, because he knows it clear down in his whole being. Now, what is it that I know? Can you tell me something that I know, thoroughly know? What does, there's a woman in the Roland Brown's church who was a troublemaker. She was just, she was the sourpuss. She's the kind that a Baptist minister in the largest Baptist church in the Pacific Coast, Dr. Brower, said to me once, my little boy said, Mrs. Jones, the president of the Ladies' Aid, reminds me of a porcupine. Well, why is that? She's got a lot of fine points, but you can't get close to her. Now, that's this kind of a woman, the kind that just can destroy a church. And Marcia had baked bread, and she knew that if you put leaven in it, or yeast, it would rise. So she said, using that parable of Jesus, now you put some love into that woman and have as much faith in love as I have in this leaven, and you may change her. There are two men, also troublemakers. Three, and she said, Jesus said, you put some leaven into 3 measures of meal, and presently the whole loaf will be leavened. Don't you see what Jesus was saying? You have 3 troublemakers. Put a lot of love every night before you go to bed. You just send love to them. Those 3 troublemakers, and the 3 measures of men, the people, and presently that whole church will be leavened. Well, they did, and they changed that whole church. And they had him come up to Benton Harbor. The men of Benton Harbor asked him to come up and spend several months just when he retired from preaching. And the official record, crime record there was lower per capita than they had. I mean, they had a worse crime rate per capita than any city practically in America. He went up there and he found a police captain. The police captain said, "I want to get this." Well, he said, "Well, is there anybody you hate?" "Yes, there is." And he named a certain politician. "Well, I believe that'd be a good place to begin." "What do you think you ought to do?" "Well, I suppose I ought to love him and pray for him, and I don't know how. You'll have to help me." So he helped him. After a while, there's a politician wanted to see him. He said, "I want to get this." He said, "Is there anybody you hate?" He said, "There certainly is." And he named that police captain. "Well, that'd be a good place to begin. What do you think you ought to do?" "Well, I suppose I ought to pray for him and love him, and I don't know how. You'll have to help me." Well, he got those two men together. They got down on their knees, and they stayed there in prayer till 2 o'clock in the morning. Today, the politician is mayor of Benton Harbor. The police captain is the chief of police. And the crime rate in that city is less than almost any city in America. You take love, you see. Jesus put that there as what we call a leaven. A lever. He took hold of something they knew what leaven is. There it is. A Roman soldier came to Jesus and he said, "I have a bond slave that I just love very much, and he's dying, and I want you to pray for him." Well, what lever could he use? George Mueller took a lever that's going to the inner room and closed the door, and what you ask in secret will be given you openly. Well, he didn't know the scriptures. They weren't just in published form. He said, "Would it be all right for me to take hold of a lever from my profession?" "Well, what is your profession?" "Why, it's war." "Can you take a lever of war and help you in prayer?" "Well, what do you mean?" "Well, I've been in the Roman army all my professional life, and any command given with authority in the Roman army is instantly obeyed. Otherwise, the head goes off." "Well, are you sure?" "Why, certainly. While I have men over me, I have men under me. When I say to one, go, he goeth. When I say to one, come, he cometh. There's no question. Now, I understand you're different from the scribes and the Pharisees, and that you speak as one having authority. I know what authority is. I don't just believe it. I know it. You won't need to come to my house if you're that type. All you have to do is to give the word. You command that disease to leave my servant, and every cell in my servant's body will obey. He's a bond slave. He obeys. I'm a soldier. I obey authority. We just not only believe this, we know it. What did Jesus say? Why, he said, "I've never seen such faith, no, not in Israel." Peter the rock and John the beloved disciples. You folks don't have the faith that this Roman captain does, who comes out of the realm of war, but he takes hold of a thing he can take hold of, and he uses it. There's a woman that John Hopkins couldn't heal. Mayo Hospital, Mayo Clinic couldn't heal her. She had a constant hemorrhage. Why couldn't they heal her? Because they were too far away, not in space, but in time. They were 2,000 years away. She was wandering down the streets of Nazareth, and she saw Jesus. And she said, that man of Galilee said, if your son asked you for bread, would you give him a stone? And how much more would your heavenly Father give you good gifts? Now, I made the clothes for my family, and I put love in every garment, and I hemmed them up carefully. Now, if I could hem my garments up, even when they did get frayed out, I'd re-hem them. Couldn't God, who made my body, put enough love into that body to hem it up? If I could just take hold of something like Elisha did, it would fit my hand, it would give me the faith that would heal me. And then she said, of all the garments that I have seen, no garment have I admired like that garment, all of one piece and woven from above, worn by the man of Galilee. She's almost ready to rush up at once and fall on her knees and grab him by the hem of the garment. And then the sister said, look out, look out. If anyone would see you grab a man of God by the hem of the garment, they'd say, there's a woman of the street. They're all just only too eager to get cases like that. They take them out to the edge of the city and they stone you to death. And so that hope vanished. She just have to reconcile herself to go through life or die early. And then she saw the crowd getting thicker and thicker, and then a daring conception came. She's going to pass right fast by that crowd of women there. They're packed so tight. If I get behind those women, and if he goes by, I'll reach under their garments, and I'll just merely touch the hem of his garment. He won't know it. Nobody will know it. But it'll give me the conviction that God is going to hem up my body. She did it. She succeeded so perfectly that no one knew it, and no one never would have known it if Jesus hadn't said, somebody using the Elisha method has touched me. They've taken hold of something with faith, and they touched my garment. Why? Peter said, and Nathaniel echoed it, and Matthew, and they just said, oh, don't bother you. So I'm going back to, why, they all just wronged you. I think that 50 people have touched you, and then you say somebody touched you. Well, I'm talking in spiritual terms. And he went right back. And there she was. Her face was flushed and all aglow and thrilled, and she threw herself at his feet, and he said, woman, your faith has made you whole. And she got into the scriptures. Wouldn't you be delighted if that was your great-great-great-great-great-grandmother? Why, my goodness, think of how close she came, the Bible passing her by and no one ever knowing it. But now what do we do at the Camps Farthest Out? We believe, as you know, that Jesus didn't remain in that tomb. And he went up to heaven and he sent the Holy Spirit down. We believe that God didn't take a vacation and just is down on a holiday ever since the Bible ended. We know he's working on the job even more now than ever. And you can take that same leverage today. Well, let's try it. 3 years ago, a woman came to me in the Texas camp and said, I have a inner flow of blood, a constant hemorrhage, and I wish you'd pray for me. I said, let us go into the prayer room. And we took Roberta Fletcher, who was the spiritual hostess, and there's a picture of Solomon Price, the present. And I said, I have seen Solomon do some of his painting. He's a very spiritual man. He loves those paintings. He put a lot of love into the painting of that picture. But he didn't put as much love into the painting of that garment as God put in the building of your body. And I told her the woman of 2,000 years ago, and I said, kneel down. Now touch the hem of the garment in that picture, and Roberta and I will pray. And believe it or not, she was healed instantly and has remained healed ever since. 2 months later, we were in the Minnesota camp. I was in the Minnesota camp, and a woman came and said, my daughter is going to have an operation next week, and I'll have to take the plane tomorrow. Here I've only had 1 day, and I'm just in heaven, and oh, I'm just so sorry. I have to leave tomorrow. And I said, what's the matter? She said, here's the letter of my daughter. Just came. She said, ever since her second child came, she's had a constant hemorrhage in her hemorrhage. I just came from the doctor, and he said my blood count is getting so low, it won't be safe to wait any longer. I'm to be operated on next week. So she said, I'm going to fly out there to be there. I said, wait a minute, let us go into this chapel. In the chapel, there was a picture of Solomon's Christ with the sheep all around, and I told her of the woman of 2,000 years ago and the woman of 2,000 miles away in Texas, and I said, you touched the hem of the garment. Well, she had to stand on her toes to touch the folds of the garment around his waist. And I prayed for the daughter, and then I said, I have a great feeling that that daughter is cured. And I'm going to suggest something. Instead of buying that ticket, I suggest you write an airmail letter. Send it airmail, and she'll get it in 2 days. Ask her just how sick, what her condition is, when the operation's to be, when she wants the mother to come, and ask her to write immediately, and in 4 days you'll get the answer, and then you still have plenty of time to get there. In 4 days the letter came. I just came from the doctor. He says, now all my organs are perfectly sound. The hemorrhage evidently stopped 2 days ago, just when we were having that prayer. And I won't need an operation. I was telling this in Portland the next year. And a woman, Portland, Oregon camp, and a woman in the back seat, a white-haired lady, rose, and she said, I am the woman that you prayed with. I'm the mother of that girl. and that the hemorrhage never came back. And I just received a letter this morning, and here it is. Uh, her third child has come, and the birth was a perfectly normal birth. We have seen this happen 3 more times. It almost happens without fail when there's hemorrhage condition. There was one case only that was the most serious the doctors said they'd ever had. It was a hemorrhage of the stomach that had some mechanical need. They finally had an operation that very rarely succeeds, and it was perfect. And that girl, Nancy Shaw, was at the camp in Ohio where there's 540 people, and she looked after the children. She's one of the most spiritual girls the world's ever known, because going through all that experience is simply marvelous. Now, you look into the Gospels, and you'll see mentioned one place that he healed the sick and he cast out demons, and they touched, some of them touched the hem of his garment. But it doesn't tell who did it. He used that hem of the garment only where they needed to have something hemmed up. He didn't have them touch the hem of the garment when he put the blind man, he put something in his eye. The lepers, he didn't have them touch the hem. He used a different leverage for different things. And so when a woman came to me and she said, I have a growth, I have a tumor and a goiter, and the doctor says I'm too frail for an operation, it would be fatal, and my only hope is prayer, I said to her, using Jesus' method, putting things into parables, the kingdom of heaven is likened unto a woman who had a little Ford car and a little Ford garage, and she's perfectly happy, till her neighbor got a great big Cadillac car for a great big Cadillac garage. Now, she didn't need a Cadillac, but she wanted to keep up with the Joneses, so she kept wanting one. And if you want a thing hard enough and long enough, you'll get it, and so she got a Cadillac. She put it into her garage, and it was too big, it stuck out, and where it sticks out, we'll call that a growth. Can you think of something that you long for that was not in your divine plan to have? She said yes, and when I found I didn't have it, I felt awful frustrated, and after a while I tried to forget it. Well, you aren't going to be cured by forgetting things. If you got an ulcerated tooth and you're afraid of the shock of having it pulled, so you just forget it, it'll manifest as rheumatism or something. So she simply forgot that, wanting a thing that didn't belong to her, an extraneous thing, and it appeared in the form of a goiter and then a tumor. And I said, I've written a book here called The Divine Plan. And I'm going to ask you to take that divine plan, take this little book, The Lord's Prayer, and shake it up every morning and read that divine plan. Do that every morning for the next 3 weeks. And I'll pray for you. At the end of 3 weeks, he wrote me, the doctor examined me, and he said, my goiter and my tumor are vanishing away, and I won't need an operation. That led me to writing a book called How to Find Help Through Prayer, in which I tried to find the emotional causes behind the various diseases. And the doctors have since come out with the discovery of what they call psychosomatics, in which they have ascribed exactly the same causes that I had. In some cases, they've gone even beyond it. And so when the people have stomach ulcers, they say there's a sense of inadequacy. You're worrying about things. Get your worrying, and that'll come to an end. A doctor came to me and said, I'm the only doctor in my town, and half the people have anemia. I said, anemia, anything the matter with the heart, means there's not quite enough love, or way back in the past. Our love itself can do more to prevent a recurrence of that than anything I know. And then if there's anything the matter with the blood flowing through the channels, that's the joy. It symbolizes the joy flowing through the channels. And if people who have, again, anemia, they often little high school girls that don't have any boy attention, and somebody falls in love with them, they get cured right away. I said, you can tell them to have a good time, get joy. Half the people in the town have anemia. Tell them to go to a movie, even go to a dance, read the novel. Well, he said, now I know what's the trouble. There are 2 churches. One of them is Lutheran church. I know there are Lutherans here, but they're different types. And this Lutheran minister says they must not smoke or drink. That's fine, wonderful. They mustn't attend a theater. They mustn't dance. They mustn't read a novel. They mustn't have any fun of any kind. And they're the ones that have anemia. Now, you'll be amazed to find how those emotional causes are more important, cause diseases more than any outer thing. Now, we were in danger of getting anemic dysentery all around the world. We would not dare touch the lettuce or anything because the irrigation, everything they use there, and the fertilizers, you'd be just practically die. But one day when we were so careful about that, and when we were in Cairo, the waiter said, "We got a wonderful, a great big bowl of strawberries. Wouldn't you like this for dessert?" "Oh, that'd be grand." We'd be safe, we'd been eating ice cream and things like that. And we ate big bowls of strawberries. And that evening we met with the .4 leaders of all of the Arabic countries. It was wonderful. Men that had charge of water supply, and one charge of improving the cattle, and others and one was met at the home of the lawyer, the legal advisor for all the Arabic countries. And they listened to us. And we got Christ right. You see what we could do on this journey. We could actually build a prayer, and they're going to establish prayer groups there. They'll go on right along with those years. And they said, "You must be careful what you eat." And he said, "We certainly are." But they said, especially strawberries. If you eat strawberries, you'll just die of that. Well, do you know what we did? We just saw that we didn't have any mean thoughts. We didn't get mad at anybody. We just full of love. And then we realized what Jesus said was true. They all eat with their hands over there in Palestine, or they did, and in India they still eat with their hands. And we were the only ones that used knives and forks. They'd even have the milk to be poured on their hands. They'd stir it around in their oatmeal and eat away. Well, now, I felt rather sympathetic for the first time of the Pharisees, who chided the disciples for eating with unmoistened hands. And then Jesus said, that can't hurt you. You can eat all the strawberries and lettuce and everything if you're all right inside. It isn't what you take into the mouth that defiles you, but the wrong thoughts you have inside. And so this book, How to Find Help Through Prayer, takes hold of that. And if you'll just see your thoughts all right and then have us do the praying, we'll just see marvelous things can happen through God. Well, I must only half through this morning, and I'm going to take 5 minutes longer, or 10 minutes longer. Football team came to me and said, we're going to play the great team in the Northwest. And the papers say we're going to lose 40-0. And we thought you could steady us. And I turned on the light, and I said, there's a break in the current, until I turned that on. We could have played all day for the lights to go on, and they wouldn't have gone on until there's a break in the switch. They have a way of telling whether you're crazy or not. Down at Mayo Hospital, they give you a pail to bail out a tub. If you bail all day without turning off the faucet, they know you're crazy. Now, if there's anyone here that has a grudge against anyone else on the team, he's shutting off the circuit, and I won't bother to pray for you. I'd be crazy to take the time to do it. And when I go to a church and I find it divided into two rival groups mad at each other, I won't even bother to pray for them until they'll come together, their leaders, and pray that they get that spirit of love, and then we go places. And so that the captain said, we're like the three musketeers, one for all and all for one. And I said, all right, let's have a prayer. And they took hands in a circle, and I prayed the Lord would use them in any way he wanted to. That night when they went out on the field, the coach, who didn't believe in these things, said, fellas, put on your fighting faces. Put on your fighting faces, I say. And then he turned to his assistant, and he said, no wonder we've lost all our games. Those boys don't have any more fight than a bunch of sheep. They're just as peaceful looking as a bunch of cows going out to eat grass. Well, those boys played as no team ever played in that college. And my father came into a business, as a young lawyer in Des Moines, and he put some money, investments in a business, was failing. They asked him if he'd come in and try to save the business. He invited the agents in from all over the state of Iowa, and he said, now we're going to make this one big happy family. Got that spirit of harmony. They went out and they doubled their business within a year. They've made him manager of agents of another company. They doubled their business within a year. He's made president of another company. They doubled their business within a year. And Ralph Budd is a young man and a friend of mine. He came down and studied Father's message. He became president of the Great Northern. He used to have me come down and look over his way of doing things. He built greater harmony in the Great Northern than any railroad in America. and it became a wonderful success. He became president of Burlington. Now his little boy Johnny, that used to play in our house, is president of the Great Northern. And Ralph Budd, according to the Time magazine, has trained over half the railroad presidents of America. These laws, you see, work marvelously. And the power of the Camps Farthest Out is that we always have council rings that are in perfect harmony. I've been in other groups, and they say, now, we don't want that sissy, that soft love stuff that you preach in the camp. We want to differ with each other. We're half of us on this, our board of directors are mad at each other. We disagree thoroughly, and we're fighting about this and that. And koinonia is just going down, down, down. I went back. I told him about my father. I told him about Ralph Budd. I told him about my football team. I said, I'm going to resign from this koinonia and ask the Camps Farthest Out just to quit pouring money into a well, an empty well, into a hole in the ground, until we get harmony. Well, all those who didn't believe in this philosophy resigned. They elected me president. We got in harmony. We've been piling up a debt up to $30,000 in just 2 months since then. We haven't even asked for any money at all. We didn't even I even wrote to Miss Bertha that was coming here to talk on, not even to come. We're putting it utterly in God's hands, and we paid off half the debt already. Lord, you get the laws working, you don't even go in a room and talk to God, and they begin to work. And we're going to see koinonia now produce turnout folks and trainees for the world in a way, but up until then it was not functioning as a spiritual force. We sent word to Roosevelt. Thousands of us wrote him, and to Churchill when Roosevelt went into war. Three men, Stalin, Churchill, and Roosevelt, sit down, take time to sit down and agree on your war aims. And you know what Churchill and Roosevelt said? And they reiterated it through the press everywhere. We're too busy winning the war. After we've won the war, then we'll discuss the war aims. Well, we never won the war. You never win in that spirit. Didn't we win the war? Folks, we defeated the enemy. That's all. For every head that is scotched of evil, another worse one, communistic thing rolling up. What do the losers have to do? They have to pay reparations. Who pays the reparations? Why, $5 billion a year over there to Japan, who we thought we defeated. We're pouring billions over there, billions into Germany, billions everywhere. We're paying the reparations. England has lost its empire. Won the war? No, they're the worst defeated country in the world. France, it has sung its swan song. Don't ever start into a thing until you agree. That young ladies, don't ever marry a man, a drunkard, saying that any promises after you get married, I'll reform. Get that reformation before you go into it. Start right. Well, and now I'll just close with this thought that don't think that this is going to make you rich right away. When I was 40 years of age, I didn't own an automobile. I couldn't live on a college professor's salary and have 3 children and tithe my income and pay payments on a house and have an automobile. I didn't want to resign my job, and I didn't want to go back to renting, and I didn't want to kill off my children, so I decided to do without an automobile. But on Sunday afternoon, my wife had pushed the baby carriage, a little 2-month-old. I'd pull a little wagon with a 2-year-old, and our little 4-year-old in a white dress had come trotting along, inspecting all the gutters in the alley. And after about 8 blocks, we'd come home and sit on the porch and watch the neighbors go out in their Cadillacs and their Fords to pick flowers and have a nice time. One day I looked at my wife, and I was wondered if she was getting a goiter. Wondered if she was looking over at the Mrs. Jones's Cadillac. So I said, when the children are little, I think we ought to have a little touring car, the cheapest little Ford touring car. Won't you figure up and see if we could afford it? She figured it up and said if we had $100 more, we could safely make the payments. Otherwise, we'll be in debt for life. In that case, we'd better push the baby carriage, I said. But then I got hold of a leverage. Our little girl had a 4-year-old and dug a well in the seashore sand that year and waited patiently till the tide came in and filled it. Let us think of the need of $100 as a little well in the seashore sand, and if God wants to send in his infinite supply, he could. If he approves of our getting a car, he could do it easily. The next week, a young man came to our house. He said, I represent a Ford agency. I understand you're thinking of getting a Ford touring car. exactly what we were thinking of, but we hadn't told anyone but the Lord. That's the first time I discovered that Henry Ford had a private pipeline with Jehovah. We told him the situation. He said, well, you'll have to decide by a week from Monday, or I can't guarantee a part of that makes this year. A week from Monday, a letter came. I opened it up, and out fell a check for $108. I had been a professor at another college, and they paid me the big sum of $1,000, not a month, but a year. $1,000 a year, and as I tithe, I'd given $100 to that college for its endowment, and now they were becoming a junior college, and they were giving the last $100,000 back to its donors. First time I ever heard of a college giving back any of its endowment funds. Well, that disturbed my wife. She made me promise I would never pray for money for ourselves. We might be fired. People might think we were New Thought or Christian Scientists or something. And I said, these promises in the Bible are just as much for us Presbyterians as they are for the Christian Scientists. And I'm going down, what's more, I'm going down to the trustees and tell them about what's happened. And I'm going to ask them to let me pray with them for a gymnasium. Oh, no, said my wife. Then they will fire you because they're all Presbyterian elders or Presbyterian ministers. I said, well, they believe in prayer. She said, not like your football team. So I went to see an old lady, and I said, don't you think it'd be all right for me to see the trustees? And she said, you and your wife have been praying for this gymnasium? And I said, yes. You won't need to see him. I just felt, as you were saying, speaking, I could see the gymnasium coming in. It's going to come sooner than anyone expects. It's going to come this year. It's going to come from a student in your writing class. Well, that rather startled me, and I thanked her, and I went home and I said to my wife, I've decided to take your advice and not see the trustees. And then I told her about this strange prophecy. In the middle of the winter, a little sophomore girl working her way through college said to me, Prof, can I see you? And I said, I'm sorry, but there's some important people I promised to see this hour. You see me some other time. And I turned my back and left the gymnasium standing right there in the room. Fortunately, she was, after the next class, 2 days later, there she was. I said, what is it, Lillian? She said, you know, we cheer the football boys, and we give them sweaters, and we give them a banquet, but we never done anything for the trustees, and 6 of them have worked for the college for 20 years. I thought it'd be nice if the students, not the faculty, but just the students, could give a party to the trustees. Folks, I've never heard of any place in America, England, anywhere, where students ever gave a party to the trustees. Well, I said, let's pick out 4 or 5 representative students to present this at the next convocation and see what they do. It went through. They gave the party. The trustees all came. The next week, they sat around the table, and they said, we ought to do something for those boys and girls. Well, what do they need? Well, they need a gymnasium. Well, we're in a depression now. We told them we couldn't get one of that for 10 years. Well, let's give them one anyway. And they took out $200,000, laid on the table. We had an open winter, something I never heard of in St. Paul. And they could put a spade in the ground in February. The gymnasium went up. Jimmy Dixon, my long-distance runner, running around that indoor track, fell in love with Lillian. When they graduated, they married. They went over to Formosa. And they're the ones that are making the greatest movement in modern missions. The headhunters are all turning to Christianity by the hundreds because of these missionaries. Well, I was driving Lillian across from Minneapolis to St. Paul when they'd been driven out during the World War. And she said, Prof, she's on the way to speak in a church. Remember that the first spadeful of dirt that's up for that gymnasium, you put some in a little bottle and you gave to me? And I said, that's right, I'd forgotten that. Well, she said, I've carried that with me. To Formosa, Japan, it's with me right now. I said, well, you hold fast to that. That's the symbol of when you erase yourself out of the picture and you let God come in. Well, we're going to try to use the levers and see them work for the kingdom and for our lives from now on. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we want to thank you for the wonderful things that you have done through the marvelous gift of your Son, who told things in parables, and out of the parables produced miracles. We have a little gratitude in the back of our hearts also for Elisha, who gave us a clue back there at the very beginning. And so now, Father, you just bless us this day. In Jesus' name, amen.